Has this ever happened to you? You break up your lecture periodically with probing questions for the whole class. You ask your questions and students are just not speaking up. Or you get crickets when you finish a point and you ask, are there any questions? Now, if you've ever taught, of course you have experienced this. And make no mistake, it's a problem. If students are not responding to questions or offering their own, you don't know what they know or don't know, and there's a good chance that they are not mentally engaged. Now, there are a lot of potential solutions to these problems, many of which are variations on structuring in-class discussions with specific conversational behaviors and roles for students. But this video will look at the simplest and most direct way to increase student participation: cold calling. There is something of a debate when it comes to cold calling. Students can be nervous or shy, so they don't like to be called on in class. This is the most common thing I hear from students when I ask them directly if there's anything I should know about them as a student. And in this day of heightened sensitivity to students' mental and emotional health, many instructors understandably are reluctant to do something in the classroom that might add to the stress or anxiety. But the truth is, cold calling gets a bad rap because many instructors just do it wrong, or at least it used to be very common for instructors to do it the wrong way. What I mean by this is that they would use the tool as a technique to get students on their toes in an almost vindictive way and to embarrass students who weren't prepared or who didn't know the answer. But the benefits of cold calling are just too great to dismiss this technique just because people are using it poorly. What are the benefits? Well, cold calling gets more voices into the conversation. It increases students' self-efficacy and confidence. It brings in a range of viewpoints, and it helps you surface students' understanding or misunderstanding. So in this video, I'm going to give you two more precise methods of cold calling that give you all the benefits of this technique while mitigating the problems. First, turn your cold calling into lukewarm calling. This means call on students only after they have engaged in some specific intellectual activity. That is, call on them after you give them a chance to warm up. This could be a brief writing exercise, or think, pair, share, or something else. And only then, after that activity, you call on students. And here's the key. You're not calling on them to test their knowledge. You're calling on them to report on what they just experienced. What did they write down? What did you and your partner decide was the answer? What interesting thing came up in your discussion? What did your partner say that was insightful or helpful? Now, does this mean you have to stop cold calling in that more traditional sense? No. So here's my second tip. Use kind cold calling. What this means is, as long as you have created a brave and curious environment where students feel supported and where getting answers wrong is actually a welcome part of the learning process, you can still cold call. You can still ask students to answer specific questions without being individually notified before you call on them. So establish early for students that you will be asking questions and calling on them, not to expose their ignorance, but because you want to hear from them and you want to support their learning. One study shows that this possibility of being called on and the thinking work that is needed to be prepared to be called on significantly improves recall. And it had the same effect whether the students wrote down the answer or were simply asked to think of the answer. So yes, cold calling can and should be used in addition to lukewarm calling. For this kind of friendly and adventurous, I might be called on, so I need to pay attention and think, is a form of retrieval practice. This is the term for actively generating answers to questions, and it is one of the surest ways to improve knowledge and comprehension. But again, frame this for your students. Tell them that you will call on them not to catch them when they're not paying attention or to expose their ignorance. Rather, you will call on them to help them build their memory. You could even tell them that you're cold calling them to help them do well on the next exam. So here's another thing. When instructors use cold calling in these kind of invitational, non-confrontational ways, students are also more likely to volunteer responses. In other words, more students speak up in class once they've had a chance to hear their own and many of their other classmates also speak. So even when you're not directly cold calling on students, having this practice as part of your regular classroom experience will help ensure that the next time you pause during a lecture and ask, "Are there any questions?" a student will actually ask a question. So how are you bringing cold calling into your classroom without raising student anxiety? It's too powerful a tool to just leave aside. Are you going to start with lukewarm calling, or are you going to cold call in a more traditional way, but make it an invitation and an explicit aid to their learning? Tell me in the comments. And remember to hit the like button if you're benefiting from these videos, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.